The call came in at 6:47 in the morning, and Lena Ashford was already on her second coffee. That was the thing about working maintenance at St. Edmond's Regional. The building never slept, which meant she never really did either. Burst pipes didn't care about shift schedules. Faulty generators didn't wait for daylight, so she'd learned, in the 2 years since she'd taken the job, to exist in that strange half-awake state that feels almost normal after a while. You stop noticing you're tired. You just move. She pulled on her jacket, clipped her ID badge, and headed down to the east corridor, where the heating unit in the surgical prep wing had been throwing error codes since Tuesday. Her toolbox rattled against her hip. The badge said Maintenance, L. Ashford. That was enough for most people. That was usually all they needed to know. She had liked it that way. Dr. Hadley Brennan was the kind of surgeon who announced his presence before entering a room. You could hear him coming. The clip of expensive shoes on polished floor, the low rumble of whoever he'd pulled into his orbit that morning, the general sense that something important was about to happen. And it was going to happen right here, right now, because he had decided it would. He was brilliant. Lena had heard that enough times to half believe it. He had the papers, the grants, the framed photographs on the wall, him shaking hands with people whose names she vaguely recognized. He had the jaw of someone who had always been listened to. He also had the habit of talking around people who weren't worth talking to, which meant that Lena, crouched behind the access panel near the prep suite door, was entirely invisible to him. The thermostat's been calibrated wrong for a week, he said to someone behind him. I've put in 3 requests. 3. And they send us, he glanced over, registered her existence with the same mild distaste one reserves for a scuff on a clean floor. This. The resident beside him, a young woman whose name tag read Holloway, looked like she wanted to disappear. Lena didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the panel, a wiring layout she'd already memorized, on the actual problem, which was a corroded relay switch that had been failing slowly and then all at once. I'll have it fixed in 20 minutes, she said. Brennan made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. 20 minutes. Right. Try not to break anything else while you're in there. He walked away. Holloway mouthed something that might have been sorry before following him. Lena replaced the relay. She had it done in 14. The thing about St. Edmond's was that it was a good hospital, trying to be a great one and mostly landing somewhere in between. The East Wing was newer, cleaner, better funded. The West Wing, where Lena spent most of her mornings, was the original building. Narrow corridors, windows that rattled in January, a heating system that had been patched and repatched until it was more patch than system. The patients out there were older mostly, the kind who came in alone and left the same way. She didn't mind the West Wing. It was quieter. She ate lunch in the maintenance office, which was really just a converted storage room, with a folding table and a space heater that she'd fixed herself 3 times. Gus, the senior facilities manager, sat across from her, reading a hockey recap on his phone. Brennan giving you grief again? He asked, without looking up. When doesn't he? He put a complaint in last month about the response time on his thermostat. It was a 20-minute fix, he said 45. She bit into her sandwich. He wasn't there. Gus looked up then, studying her the way he'd done a few times over the past year. Not suspicious, exactly. More like curious. Like he was still trying to figure out what she was doing here. She was good at the job, too good for someone who just wandered in off the street. She knew electrical systems and hydraulics and structural load tolerances and a dozen other things that maintenance workers at regional hospitals didn't usually know. He'd never asked about it directly. She appreciated that. "You want me to push back?" "No," she said. "Leave it." She finished her coffee. She thought about the relay switch and whether the one in the northwest corridor was due for replacement too. She did not think about Kandahar. She was getting better at that. The afternoon started normal and then didn't. Lena was in the stairwell between the second and third floors, checking a reported crack in the wall casing, stress fracture, probably cosmetic. She'd need to run a sensor along the seam to be sure, when she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard in years, but which her body recognized before her mind caught up. A structural groan. Low, deep, the kind of sound that travels through concrete and says something is giving way. Then, 3 seconds later, the crash. It came from the third floor, the West Wing Surgical Recovery Bay. She was moving before she'd decided to move, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Toolbox still in hand, the particular stillness she'd learned to locate inside herself already settling into place. Not calm, exactly. More like a narrowing, like the world getting smaller and more precise. Only the next step, only of you. The corridor at the top of the stairs was gray with dust. A section of the drop ceiling had come down. Old tiles, metal framing, a run of ductwork that hadn't been properly supported in probably 15 years. She'd flagged it in her inspection notes back in October. The work order was still pending. A man was on the floor. He'd been on his way back from a procedure. Still in a hospital gown, IV line trailing. He was conscious but barely, and she could see from the angle of his left arm and the way he was holding his breath that something had hit him badly on the way down. A chunk of the ceiling framing lay across his lower legs. He wasn't pinned, not exactly, but he was in shock and he wasn't going to be able to move himself. "Hey," she crouched down beside him. "I've got you. Look at me." He looked. His eyes were glassy but tracking. "What's your name?" "Daryl," he said. His voice was thin. "Okay, Daryl, I'm Lena. I'm going to check you over, and then we're going to get you out of here. Don't move your head." She ran her hands along his neck first. No deformity, no midline tenderness, good. Chest. He winced on the right side when her fingers found the fourth rib, but breath sounds were present bilaterally. No tracheal shift, no distension. Left arm. The wrist was wrong, definitely fractured, but that wasn't what was going to kill him. His color was bad and getting worse, and when she pulled back his gown just far enough to check his abdomen, she felt it. Rigid, guarded, the particular stillness of something bleeding that shouldn't be. Internal. Blunt trauma from the ceiling fall. She needed a room. She was already lifting the frame off his legs. It was lighter than it looked, hollow aluminium, when the nursing staff started arriving. A young RN, barely 25, stood at the end of the corridor with her hands over her mouth. "Call a trauma response," Lena said, without looking up. "Internal abdominal bleed, probable splenic involvement. Tell them I need a room now." The RN didn't move. "Hey." Lena's voice was steady. "Now. Go." The RN went. 2 more nurses arrived. One of them, older, a charge nurse named Patterson, whom Lena had seen around the floor, knelt down on the other side of Daryl and immediately started taking his vitals. She had the look of someone who had been in bad situations before and did not waste time. "BP's dropping," Patterson said. "I know. We need to move him." "Are you?" Patterson looked at Lena, really looked at her, at the toolbox and the badge and the gray dust on her jacket. "Are you medical?" "I'm maintenance," Lena said. "Let's move him." Brennan arrived with the trauma team 2 minutes later. He took in the scene, the collapsed ceiling, the patient on the floor, the dust. Lena's hands still pressed to Daryl's side, and his first reaction was to pull Patterson aside and ask what was happening. His second was to look at Lena the way you look at something you can't quite categorize. "Why is she still here?" he said to no one in particular. "She's been managing the patient," Patterson said. "She's in maintenance." His pressure was 60/40 when she found him. Brennan crouched down, did his own quick assessment, and Lena stepped back to give him room. Not out of deference, but because he was the surgeon and he needed the space to do what he did best. She watched him work. He was fast. Whatever she thought of him, he was fast. "We need to move now," he said. "Or 3 is open. Let's go." She helped transfer Daryl to the gurney. Her hands were steady. Daryl grabbed her wrist as they lifted him. "You're coming?" he said. "The surgeons will take care of you from here," she said. "You're going to be fine." He didn't look convinced. She didn't blame him. The hallway emptied out. The dust was still settling. Lena stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at the ceiling where it had come down. The stress fracture in the wall casing 2 floors below was probably related. Load redistribution, old building, shifting the weight in ways it wasn't supposed to. She'd need to file an amended report. She'd need to get an engineer in to check the structural column. She picked up her toolbox. She started toward the stairs. Wait, it was Patterson. The charge nurse was standing in the doorway of the supply room, watching her with an expression that was somewhere between professional and personal. Something had shifted in her face since the corridor. "Where did you learn to do that?" Patterson asked. Lena paused. "Do what?" "The assessment. The way you ran through that. Neck, chest, abdomen, in order, no hesitation. And you called splenic involvement before he even had imaging." "A moment. I took some courses," Lena said. Patterson studied her for a long time. "Then, he would have bled out if you hadn't held that pressure." Lena nodded once, turned, and walked away. She found out the next morning that Daryl McIntosh, 53, construction foreman from Gatineau, had made it through surgery. Splenic laceration, Brennan had repaired it. 3 hours. He was in recovery, stable, asking for his wife. Gus told her over coffee. He'd heard from one of the OR nurses. "They're saying some maintenance worker triaged him in the corridor," he said carefully. Lena looked at the wall. "That right. Fast thinking, building does what it does. You adapt." Gus was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know Brennan filed an incident report." She looked at him. "Said a non-clinical staff member had interfered with patient management. Said it raised liability concerns." She turned back to her coffee. "He's going to push for a review," Gus said, "of your conduct." "Okay. Lena, I heard you, Gus. I'm just saying, is there anything I should know? Anything that might come up in a review?" The fluorescent light buzzed above them. Outside, it was February in Ontario, which meant gray sky and old snow, and the particular sound of a city that has been cold for too long. "I was a combat medic," she said finally. "JTF-2, 3 tours, 1 in Mali, 2 in Afghanistan. I got out 4 years ago." Gus was quiet. "I don't advertise it," she said. "It doesn't change what I do here." "JTF-2, he said. It wasn't a question. "Joint Task Force 2, Canada's Special Operations Unit. The quiet ones, the ones you didn't hear about on the news. I'm good at fixing things," she said. "That's the job." He nodded slowly. He turned his phone face down on the table, which she thought was its own kind of answer. "I'll handle the report," he said. She didn't expect what happened next. Patterson had talked. Not out of malice. Lena understood that eventually. The charge nurse had spent 20 years watching people move through that hospital. And she knew what competence looked like, and she knew what that looked like. And those are not always the same thing. So she'd mentioned it to one of the residents. The resident had told another. And by Thursday, there was a different quality to the way people looked at Lena in the hallways. Not everyone knew, but enough did. Holloway, Brennan's resident, stopped her near the medication dispensary on Thursday morning. She was young, third year, the kind of tired that comes from wanting something badly enough to let it hollow you out a little. "I heard what you did," Holloway said. Lena waited. "I was in the OR. I assisted on Mr. McIntosh." She paused. Dr. Brennan said it was. He said the initial management was adequate. A small, careful pause on that word. Adequate. "That's good to hear," Lena said. It was more than adequate. Something in Holloway's voice was unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with Daryl McIntosh. Lena looked at her more carefully. "You doing okay?" she asked. Holloway laughed a little, the laugh of someone who's been asked the wrong version of a question they needed someone to ask. "I have rounds in 10 minutes, so..." "Right." Holloway stopped, started again. "Dr. Brennan runs a very particular OR. And if you're not what he considers, if he doesn't think you belong there, she pressed her lips together. "I heard what he said to you in the corridor last week, and then what he did with the incident report." Lena leaned against the wall. She had no particular agenda. She just waited, the way she'd learned to wait. Present, but not pressing. "Is it always like that?" Holloway asked. "Being in a room full of people who don't think you're supposed to be there?" A pause. "For a while," Lena said. "And then it stops mattering." "How?" "You stop needing them to know what you know. You just know it." Holloway looked at her for a long moment. Then she straightened up, adjusted her badge, and nodded. "Rounds," she said. "Go." She went. The review happened the following Monday. It was a joint meeting. Hospital administration, the patient safety committee, Patterson, Brennan, Gus, and Lena, all in a room on the 4th floor that smelled like recycled air and institutional carpet. Lena wore the same thing she always wore. She had not thought about what to wear, because it hadn't occurred to her that it mattered. Brennan made his case clearly, and without particular venom. She had to concede, a precise man. He outlined the protocols around non-clinical staff interaction with patients. He cited the liability exposure. He said, twice, that he understood the instinct, but that instinct was not a substitute for credentialing. He didn't look at her when he spoke. The committee chair, a woman named Dr. Fournier, whose first name was also the kind Lena had no use for in that context, asked Lena to walk them through what had happened. She did. Calmly, in sequence, without editorializing. The sound she'd heard, the assessment, the interventions, the transfer. She used the correct clinical terminology because it was the most efficient language available, and she'd never seen the point in pretending she didn't have it. When she finished, there was a silence. "Miss Ashford," Dr. Fournier said, "can you tell us about your medical background?" "Combat medic," Lena said. "JTF-2, 12 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, the last 8 in Special Operations Medicine, extensive trauma management in austere environments, blast injuries, penetrating wounds, hemorrhage control, airway management in the field. I left the service 4 years ago." Brennan looked at her. It was the first time he'd looked at her directly since the meeting started. "Why maintenance?" Dr. Fournier asked. It wasn't confrontational. It was genuinely curious. Lena thought about how to answer that. She thought about the year after she got out. The apartment in Ottawa, the job applications she'd half completed and then closed. The months when the distance between what her hands knew how to do and what felt safe to do with them was a distance she couldn't cross. The way the work here, the physical, immediate, one problem at a time work, had been the first thing that felt manageable. The way fixing a pipe or a relay switch or a cracked ceiling casing was the same as treating a wound in the ways that mattered. You found the problem. You solved the problem. You moved on. It suited me, she said. Another silence. Patterson spoke for the first time. I want to be on record. That man was deteriorating when she found him. By the time the trauma team arrived, he had a pressure of 60/40, and she had already identified and was managing the most likely source. Whatever the protocols say, she made a clinical difference. Brennan said nothing. Lena looked at the table. I want to be clear, she said. I wasn't trying to override anyone. There was no one there. The building I was responsible for injured that man, and I had the skills to help him, and I used them. That's all. That's all. She meant it exactly as she said it. They didn't fire her. She hadn't expected them to, though she'd have understood if they had. What she hadn't expected was Brennan. He found her on Wednesday. She was in the East Wing service corridor, running a line check on the updated heating system. The one that had been the whole reason she'd been in that part of the building on the morning of the collapse. She heard his shoes on the floor. She'd always know them now, she supposed, and she didn't turn around. Ashford. She finished noting the reading. Then she turned. He was in his coat, no stethoscope, no entourage. He looked like a man who had arrived somewhere uncomfortable through his own decisions. I pulled your service record, he said. I know someone at D&D. A pause. I shouldn't have, probably. She said nothing. 3 commendations, he said. 2 operational deployments under fire. The citation from Hellman, he stopped. Looked at the floor. I didn't know. You didn't ask. He looked up. I wasn't wearing a sign, she said. You didn't need to know. Daryl McIntosh didn't need you to know. He needed someone to keep him alive until his surgeon showed up. A beat. You showed up. You did your job. That's what mattered. Brennan was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than she expected. I said things, he said, that I wouldn't have said to someone I knew had that background. You say those things to the people you think don't have it. That's the problem. He took that without flinching, which she gave him credit for. I've been thinking about that, he said. Good. He turned to go. Then, the patient asked about you, McIntosh. He asked his recovery nurse if there was a woman. He said maintenance, who'd been with him. He said he wanted to thank her. Lena looked at him. She didn't know who he meant, Brennan said. I told her I'd pass it along. He walked away. The shoes on the floor, quieter now. She turned back to the panel. She finished the line check. She marked the heating unit as operational and moved on to the next thing. Daryl McIntosh was in recovery for 8 days. On day 5, he was moved to a step-down room on the west wing, the old part of the building. The part with the rattling windows and the heating that still wasn't quite right. On day 6, his wife drove up from Gatineau with his daughter. On day 7, he was sitting up and eating actual food. On day 8, Lena had a cracked seal in the pipe casing outside his room. She heard him before she saw him. He was on the phone, laughing at something. The low, comfortable laugh of a man who had scared himself badly and come out the other side, and was laughing now, partly because it was funny, and partly because he could. She did her job. She fixed the seal. She was moving on when she heard the door open. Hey. She stopped. He was in the doorway in his hospital gown, IV pole beside him. Considerably more color in his face than the last time she'd seen it. His wife stood behind him with the expression of a woman who has agreed to one short trip into the hallway and no more. "You're the one who found me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Your wife should make you go back to bed," Lena said. He smiled. He had the kind of face that was made for smiling, the kind that looked like it had been doing it a long time. "She's been saying that for 30 years. Doesn't work," his wife said, without moving. "He's not wrong. I just wanted to say thank you." His voice was plain and direct, the way people get when they mean something completely. "I don't know what you did exactly. They explained some of it. But I know you were there, and I know it mattered." Lena thought about that corridor, the dust in the air, his blood pressure, the way the world had gotten very small and very clear, the way it always did, the way she'd spent 4 years missing and dreading in equal measure. "You did the hard part," she said. He shook his head. "Don't do that. Let somebody say thank you." A pause. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Thank you for saying it." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more and had the wisdom not to. He took his IV pole and turned back toward the room. "Get some rest, Daryl." "You know my name," he said over his shoulder. "You told me in the hallway." He stopped, turned to look at her again, and this time there was something else in his face. The moment of remembering that he'd been on the floor, that there'd been dust and pain and a voice telling him to look at her, to stay with her, that the voice had been hers. "Right," he said softly. "You said you had me." "I did." His wife put a hand on his arm. He covered it with his and let himself be guided back in. Lena picked up her toolbox. The hallway was quiet and ordinary, the old building holding its own weight, the way old buildings do, not perfectly, but stubbornly, the way things do when they've been standing long enough. She went back to work. In March, the hospital posted an internal notice. They were expanding the emergency response protocol to include designated first responder volunteers from non-clinical departments, trained to support trauma response in the interval between emergency and clinical staff arrival. The program would require candidates to pass a clinical competency assessment. The notice did not mention anyone by name. Patterson left a copy in the maintenance office. Just set it on the folding table without comment, the way you do when you want someone to find something and don't want to make it a whole thing. Lena read it twice over her coffee. She thought about Kandahar. She thought about the relay switch in the northwest corridor that was probably due for replacement. She thought about Holloway and the way she'd straightened her badge before walking away, and the particular sound of someone deciding something. She folded the notice and put it in her jacket pocket. Outside, winter was finally giving. The snow on the roof was melting into the gutters she'd cleared in January, moving the way water moves when it finally has somewhere to go. Quiet, purposeful, unhurried. She finished her coffee. She went to find the relay switch. Some things don't announce themselves. They just hold until it's time. And then they do what they were always going to do. And the only question is whether someone who knows how to pay attention is there when it matters. She was there. She always had been.